What does that young man do? Does he behave in a different way? Let's look at the states where the difference between the adult punishment system is harsh, the juvenile punishment system is benign. Let's look at what happens there. Let's look at what happens when the situation is reversed. Let's look at what happens when there's basically no difference between the two punishment systems. That's basically what he asked. He was able, in that way, to quite precisely identify the deterrent effect of prisons, if there was a deterrent effect of prisons. Didn't ask whether prisons were a good thing, didn't ask whether prisons reformed you, didn't ask any of those questions, important questions, very narrow focus question. Do prisons deter crime? And it turns out that Gary Becker was right. Gary Becker was right all along. Right about everybody? No. Right about the kid on 15th Street? Of course not. Right about enough criminals, enough of the time, that you can measure a clear response to punishment, a clear weighing up these kids' minds of the costs and benefits, the risks that they're running. Yeah, he was right enough for that. And that's a very important discovery that Levitt came up with. Just one of many. I mean, it's just one jigsaw piece. Just one jigsaw piece in this great jigsaw that we're trying to put together that explains how life works. Now, at this point you might be thinking to yourself, okay, fine, that's interesting, maybe that's not surprising, maybe it is surprising, depends really on your ideological beliefs beforehand, but how could it be? How could these kids be so sensitive to the risks of punishment? How could they be so responsive to the incentives given to them by the prison system? And there are many, many other examples in the book. The very first example I give in the book shows that teenagers are highly responsive, first, to the risks of sexually transmitted disease, and second, to the vagaries of abortion law when they decide how careful they're going to be when having sex, whether they're going to have sex at all, what kind of sex they're going to have, whether they're going to use condoms, oral sex, regular sex. Incredibly, under the circumstances, given that you would think there was nothing less rational than an oversexed teenager, they respond quite precisely to the incentives they face, the risks they face. So how could it be? You've got a juvenile delinquent, you've got a teenager having some drunken fumble. The Excel spreadsheets don't come out. Okay, they're not there with the calculators. They're not working out on pen and paper. How could they do it? Think about your own life. You might weigh up costs and benefits. You're sophisticated people. You might sometimes weigh up the costs and benefits of your actions. You know, write down the pros and cons list, but you don't do it very much. It's not the way you run your life. You probably don't do it much when you're dating. You're deciding which friends to spend time with. You don't do it whether you're working out whether to mug an old granny. I mean, that's just not the way you think. So how could it possibly be true that we do weigh up costs and benefits? After all, this stuff is hard. Well, you can fail graduate school for not being able to do the sums. It's quite mathematically testing. Well, here's what I think is going on. Let's think of a parallel argument. Parallel argument says that in principle, it's impossible to catch a cricket ball. Now, we know it's impossible to catch a cricket ball because the mathematics that the cricket ball describes in flight are fairly complex. Most people can't solve them. People with A-level maths, who at least remember their A-level maths, could solve them, but they certainly can't solve them quickly enough to catch the cricket ball. Okay? QED. It is theoretically impossible to catch a cricket ball. Now, the problem is, of course, unless you're in the England team, you can catch a cricket ball. So what do we know from that? Well, we know that some part of our brain is doing the maths. Or if it's not doing the maths, it's doing something that is a shortcut for the maths, an effective shortcut for the maths. Now, that doesn't prove that we subconsciously weigh up costs and benefits. It doesn't prove it at all. But I think it indicates it's perfectly possible. There is no reason why we couldn't subconsciously calculate costs and benefits, even quite sophisticated calculations. Or we might adopt shortcuts that are very effective substitutes for calculating costs and benefits. Now, that's quite possible. When it comes to the question of can we catch a cricket ball, we don't look at theory, we look at evidence. I throw you the cricket ball, I see if you catch it. That's what we have to do in the end when we're asking whether people are rational. We can't answer the question in theory, so we go to the evidence. And that's what I do again and again in the book. There are no statistical tables, no statistical calculations, but I do try to give a sense of the richness of and the inventiveness of the way that these economists are going about their business. Now, some of you are looking a little bit depressed. I don't know whether it was the talk of the crime, teenage sex, or the cricket. But, so let me cheer you up. Let me give you an example of inventive, empirical investigation that some economists have done. Not because it's going to win the Nobel Prize, because it isn't. Not because it's terribly important, because it isn't, but just because it's fun. And it gives you a sense of how odd some of these questions are that they're asking and answering. So before I tell you the story, let me ask, put your hands up. Anybody here been on a speed date? Wow, that is a more honest response than I have ever seen from any audience anywhere in the world. I counted 4. I mean, the rest of you, let me just check. The rest of you, any of the rest of you got any friends? Been on a speed date? Yeah, okay. There's a reasonably large proportion of people in the room claiming ignorance. So let's just play along with that and let's pretend that you don't know what a speed date is. So on a speed date, let's just, for simplicity, let's talk about a heterosexual speed date. Heterosexual speed date, say 20 men, 20 women, otherwise we'll get really confused. 20 men, 20 women. Probably organised either by a student union or by a professional company. Friday night. 20 men, 20 women, 20 tables for 2. 20 candles. 20 very large glasses of Chardonnay. So the ladies are going to need them. 20 pints. And each of these people has shown up hoping to meet the right person, or maybe several right people, by just having some very brief conversations, 3-minute conversations. What will happen is the speed dating rep will ring a little bell, all the ladies will sit at their assigned tables, and then the gents will then go and sit one at each table. And they will talk for 3 minutes, which of course is their first mistake. I keep saying you should listen for 3 minutes, but they'll talk for 3 minutes. And then the speed dating rep will ring a bell, everyone will shake hands, if it's gone well, maybe a peck on the cheek, and then they will move to the next table. The gentlemen will move to the next table, ladies will stay where they are. Another 3-minute date, another ringing of the bell, and then move on. So after an hour and a half, you've met every person of the opposite sex in the room for 3 minutes. An important step to this procedure, which is in between dates, you have a brief window of time, and you have a report card. The report card is very simple. It says, date number 1, yes or no. Date number 2, yes or no, and so on. Word of etiquette. It is considered polite not to let the person you just dated see. Now, the great thing about this, what happens at the end of the speed dating evening is the speed dating company will match the yeses. Whenever there's a match of the yes, they will swap cell phone numbers, mobile phone numbers, they'll swap email addresses, so the 2 people can then get in touch, have a proper date, and realize they hate each other after all. Now, the speed dating company also have information that people have filled out before they came. Do you smoke? What's your income every year? How old are you? The answer to some of these questions is surely none of your business, but what level of education do you have? What's your height? What's your weight? Just some basic statistics they have about people. Now, here's the great thing. 2 economists, Michel Belot and Marco Francesconi, managed to charm the UK's largest speed dating company into handing over all of this data to them.